these long years, I have been treated as though I were not a man. But now the Congress of the United States and the legislature of this state have invested in me the rights of manhood. And I ask conservative gentlemen here present, I appeal to their good sense, will they not pronounce me a fool and a hypocrite if I did not employ my newly obtained rights in voting against Congress and against this legislator? Gentlemen, I could not do it. The colored people are asked to send delegates to the conservative state convention. Conservative means opposed to reform. Am I opposed to reform? How can I be? Radical means root. It means going back to the principles of the Declaration and the Constitution. Am I not necessarily radical? Moreover, the call to the state convention was made by men who literally opposed colored suffrage in the legislature and the Equal Rights Reconstruction Plan adopted by Congress. They say in the call that the object is to save the country from the ruinous policy of the radical party, the ruin which they predict will result from the enfranchisement of a colored man. Now, how can I, as a colored man, just invested with my rights, go into a convention, which is an organized protest against those very rights? This was part of a speech by the Reverend Daniel Watkins in 1867 in the Tennessee State Colored Convention. Through the efforts of black people who held and participated in convention, the first state in the former Confederacy to grant suffrage. In these conventions, participants not only share their personal narratives and experiences, but also collectively affirm their humanity in a society that constantly and consistently sought to marginalize them. This platform allowed them to challenge systemic injustices and confront racial discrimination directly. Furthermore, these gatherings fostered a profound sense of community among attendees, promoted solidarity and collaboration in the fight for civil rights. In essence, the colored conventions represented a critical juncture for black activism, where individuals came together to advocate for their rights, celebrated their identities, and strategized for a future where they could fully claim their place as equal members of society. Take, for instance, the very first convention held right here in Philadelphia at Bethel AME Church. Dr. Tyler is going to be talking a little bit more about that later. September the 20th to the 24th, 1830, some 40 delegates represented 7 states and met with a firm and settled conviction, grounded in their understanding of the, quote, inestimable and invaluable instrument, namely the Declaration of Independence, that their forlorn and deplorable situation earnestly and loudly demands for us to devise and pursue all legal means for the speedy elevation of ourselves to the scale and standing of men. The color conventions were organized by visionaries and courageous leaders within the black community who possess a profound awareness of worth and potential. These leaders not only convened to discuss issues of the day, but also aim to forge a collective identity and advocate for the rights and recognition in a society rife with racial injustice. The dialogues and expressions that emerged from these conventions contributed to the formation of a unique rhetorical tradition, one that rigorously interrogated the concepts of democracy and freedom and justice. These ideas were not treated as abstract ideas to be admired, but rather understood as tangible and often contested realities that demanded active engagement and reform. Rooted deeply in the faith and spirituality, the color conventions were informed by a rich tradition of religious conviction that underscored the movement's moral imperative to challenge systemic oppression. This spiritual foundation provided not only a source of strength and resilience, but also a framework for critiquing the theological narratives that justified racism and social hierarchies. Participants often grappled with the prevailing ideology that portrayed God as an ally to the oppressor and sought to reframe those beliefs by emphasizing a divine commitment to justice, liberation, and the inherent dignity of all people. The rhetorical richness displayed in their speeches illustrated not only their oratorical skills, but also their ability to engage deeply with the pressing issues of their time. While the atmosphere was predominantly collaborative and goal-oriented, moments of personal rivalry and minor disagreements, you'll be shocked, I know, occasionally surfaced, revealing the participants' humanity and the complexity of relationships. Nonetheless, such conflicts never overshadowed the seriousness of the collective mission or diminished their profound dedication to achieving freedom and equality for their community. Their unwavering commitment to this cause remains a significant testament to their legacy and the enduring struggle for civil rights. You see, an examination of the color conventions reveals several additional areas that merit exploration and consideration. One especially noteworthy observation is the striking predominance of male voices in the official discussions and formal proceedings of the gatherings. While men often took the stage, recent scholarship research has begun to illuminate a vital, frequently overlooked contributions of women to this significant and historical moment. For instance, as you will hear from Dr. Berger, scholars underscore the indispensable roles that women played at every stage of the convention movement, revealing how their efforts were crucial in shaping objectives and impact. Through careful analysis, these scholars illustrate the diverse strategies women employed, from organizing and mobilizing communities to advocating for social justice and equality. Women were not merely supporters, but pivotal leaders and innovators whose efforts were fundamental to shaping the movement's trajectory and legacy. In doing so, it foregrounds the importance of acknowledging and celebrating the multifaceted contributions of women whose voices have often been marginalized in historical accounts. An examination of the Color Convention reveals the richness of debates and disagreements, highlighting the complexity and diversity of thought that characterize these gatherings. Within these sessions, delegates often found themselves at odds with several key issues that reflected the broader strategies faced by struggles faced by African Americans. For instance, some delegates passionately argued for immigration as a viable solution. Others, integration. Others, conciliatory. Others, more forceful, more confrontational. Additionally, the rhetoric employed during these conventions varied significantly. To fully appreciate the significance, though, of the color conventions, I need to highlight the importance of Black-owned and operated newspapers. Very instrumental in amplifying the ideas generated at these conventions. By documenting the proceedings in print, these publications allowed Black individuals, whether literate or not, to engage with the significant issues affecting their communities. Those who could not read could still access the information through the oral traditions, as the insights shared in these newspapers often sparked discussions in homes and churches and community gatherings. And then, of course, finally, convention oratory serves as a crucial and critical element in the Black rhetorical tradition, particularly in its relationship to democracy and politics. It embodies a vital principle, the ability to navigate and maintain the delicate balance between the tangible realities of life and the aspirational ideas that society strives for. In conclusion, College U. Woodson builds on what we now see expressed in hundreds of addresses delivered at the conventions that preceded him. Good oratory for Woodson does not necessarily come from leaders in government positions or leaders in society, but from those who desire to change in the established order of things. For Woodson, the best oratory emerges from those who have suffered or seen the suffering of others and want to speak out on that suffering. His ideas of oratory, springing up from the breast of patriots, as he said, speaks to an inward compulsion to speak Thus, good oratory has a challenging function attached to it, one that does not adhere to rules and regulations, but one out of a sense of duty from deep, deep inside. Good oratory for Whitson comes from a desire to make things right, to make them in balance and harmony. You see, simply put, the color conventions were the first public-facing, all black-led, organized gatherings of African Americans to discuss issues and problems facing black people in America. They showed a collective commitment to systemic change and highlighted the power of black agency at a time when such efforts were often met with resistance. African Americans managed every aspect of the conventions from beginning to end. They issued a call, selected the locations, planned the events, selected the delegates, advertised and promoted the conventions and the newspapers, created the structure, provided the lodging and for the attendees, reported the conventions in their newspapers, wrote the rules and the minutes, and much, much more. While it is important to note, yes, some white folks showed up and spoke at these conventions, they were still literally in black hands. The rhetoric, the ideals, the goals exchanged during these gatherings were driven by the perspectives and experiences of black people. And they underscored the profound significance of these conventions as a platform for black empowerment and social change. The color conventions were a movement that still bears witness today. A movement led and operated by black folk who dared to believe that they mattered. A movement that established the black rhetorical tradition that re-examined the meaning of democracy, freedom, citizenship, and justice. A movement that became the intellectual hub for activists and a point of ongoing state and national collaboration. A movement grounded in faith that did not fully accept the tenets of what will become a theology rooted in a racist notion of God. A movement that spoke truth to the proverbial powers, yet had time to speak truth to each other as well. A movement that's designed and discerned the sign of the times and spoke directly into it without shame. A movement where people argued and debated. They were performative and sometimes petty, but also profound and persistent. A movement that reminds us all what Charles Langston said in 1866. We must be a constant trouble in the state until it extends to us equal and exact justice. Right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denise Berger. I am a senior team member at the Center for Black Digital Research, and I have the unenviable position of following, but if you will, this will be the meeting after the meeting, where we're going to get down into the message and see what is behind and in the middle of the sermonic delivery. So we're going to take a step back as we step forwards. Thank you, Janelle, for putting that up.
Just tell me when to click.
Right now. There we go. All right, many people in and out of the academy are still not aware of the more than 7 decades long color conventions movement, which Reverend Dr. Johnson has taken us so brilliantly through. Though Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson cited the 1865 South Carolina Convention in her now famous and righteous, I would say, opinion in support of originalism by identifying black activists as engaged in public discourse about the 14th Amendment, we weren't just the subject, we were shaping the conversation. That perspective, which she offered, supports the most inclusive interpretation of the 14th Amendment, which, as we know, is a premise of birthright citizenship. The majority of American people still do not know the deeply shaping effects of black intellectual activism on black and white America. They do not know who these activists were, where they were located, they don't know their work, they don't know their names, and why what they did remains important then as now. This idea of absence in place of presence was deftly captured, Janelle, by Martin Luther King Jr. when he described America as owing Black Americans the value of a bad check, or what Carsonia Wise Whitehead, who is the current leader of ASALT, described as the invisible black hands that have guided America's remarkable development, because Black intellectual activists did not simply exist. They labored and strived constantly, contributing to American laws, institutions, discourse, and culture. More significantly, Black resistance to oppression has pushed our nation to create those laws, to define those concepts, such as freedom in 1639, citizenship in 1740, and the American public education system beginning officially in 1841 with the first Black colored convention focusing on education in Ohio. Bet y'all never heard about that. So this race-based erasure that I'm talking about is heightened exponentially for Black women, and therefore exerted both an erasing and a muting effort over their bodies and their words and their labor, including those women who are central to American public education activism. Yeah, that's good. Because Black women were and are at the intersection of race and gender, the powerful violence of these contending forces exerted pressures on their lives and their archival afterlives. I'm going to say it again. Because of the intersection power of race and gender, it's harder to find Black women in the archives. It's not that we're not there, we're there. It's just harder to find us. So predictably, one of the ongoing issues with the Colored Convention Project Archive remains that we have to work harder to identify and find the work that can be produced from utilizing documents that are resistant to the presence of Black women. I want to say again, there's not a dearth of Black women activists in these records, but rather a disparity in the ways they show up in the archives, right? Not a dearth, there's a disparity. So though Black women were sparse in the records, Black women educated and activists were ubiquitous. All the women whose names we have recorded up to this moment in early colored conventions, every single one of them was a teacher or an educator, without exception. This fact prompts questions. Did highly educated Black women who had well-developed public lives really allow themselves to be silenced? Their contributions erased in convention records? I remember sitting there and thinking, this doesn't make any sense to me as a Black woman. That's not going to work. And if they did, how was this done and by whom and why? And how and why did some Black women break through to show up in the minutes and or newspaper coverage that Reverend Dr. Johnson has mentioned? Why were so many women who did show up in the records to the one teachers? And if this shroud of invisibility was so thick, except with teachers, what or who else was being obscured? So Black women into and through the colored conventions movement practiced a specific educational activism, I argue, in the 19th century, which brought their Christian faith into the civil and secular world through what I term a sacred educational citizenship practice. Rock with me, y'all. I coined the term sacred Black testimony to name the rhetorical tradition created by these activists. This theoretical and rhetorical discourse, which carried the hopes and dreams of freedom and citizenship from sacred into civil spaces in a dialectical call and response between the individual and the collective, the sacred and the secular, in which the actualization of the exchange blurred those lines, creating instead a realm of possibilities and potentialities in the face of relentless denial, destruction, and brutality.
That's right.
Sacred Black testimony began in Black church spaces and practices, which in turn found full political expression in the Black activist colored conventions movement, 1830 to around 1900, and full manifestation by Black women in the schools they created and ran. So sacred Black testimony, therefore, finds its ideological roots. Reverend Dr. Johnson has already heightened some of this in classic African rhetorical traditions and cosmology that were nurtured, not destroyed, Orlando Patterson, during the horrors of enslavement. The ritual and practice of testimony that began in the Black church, y'all know how this works, became a method and a strategy that Black men and women later used and refined in political colored conventions. We're rigorous debates about Robert's Rules of Order, people being petty or not, the validity of what to fight for, and how dominated conversations in church halls, dinner tables, reading rooms, and literary societies over days and weeks, y'all. These were the conversations and the discourse that led to the development of schools we know, Talladega College, Howard Law, Morehouse, and many others, some of which no longer exist, as well as numerous articles in Black and white newspapers, petitions to various branches of government, pamphlets, public letters, and mutual aid projects. So conceptually, therefore, what I'm trying to explain is that citizenship for Black Americans was first accessible and attainable through a divine understanding of their rights as children of God. This unassailable belief, this knowledge, this knowing became the foundation of not just faith, but political practice, and then later on, civil rights demands. So the colored conventions movement archives, as Dr. Johnson has mentioned, are filled not just with biblically inspired words and the fire of its leaders, but with hope, with love of the attendees and the delegates whose participation pushed America to engage and actually define its ideals of citizenship and justice. So I coined the term curatorial hedging to name the collective strategic mutual response to the disproportionate violence Black women faced in the public sphere. This should sound familiar because Black women, unfortunately, have always been at the cutting edge of the kind of violence that we later see playing out, whether with doxing, whether with what's happened with political activism in the streets. It was no different then. So consequently, Black women's presence in the official archives of the Colored Convention movement, I argue, are muted. So it actually belies their real presence and work, which were known, understood, and needed in their communities. So official Colored Convention movement documents were distributed to the white and Black press, and therefore at odds with the real experiences at conventions. Let me explain what I mean. Hundreds of thousands of people attended these conventions. They knew that Black women were there and were speaking. So why is it the official record mutes them? It's not like no one was being fooled. So if they knew and there was a tension there, that leads me to the conclusion that this was done deliberately. So it is within this tension that I'm making a claim for a kind of political performance, which we're good at, which existed in the slip between white and Black expectations, the purported limitations of Black women, and Black women's quiet resistance. It is in this space where curatorial hedging was forged and utilized. This argument shifts trajectories, people, subjects, and goals, and gains of Black intellectual activist history, American education history, women's history, and invites a complication of what I suggest is a too easy dismissal of Black women's work and Black men's limitations during the 19th century. I further suggest that the largely integrated Black education convention movement, which we're going to talk about right now, which spun directly out of the Colored Convention movement, proves this point, with Black women taking explicit leadership roles in many education conventions beginning in the 1840s alongside Black men, with little or no resistance, as is evidenced by the easy inclusion of Black women at all levels of organizing, presenting, and leading. Why was it okay to have the women in the education spaces at the same time as muting them in the political spaces? We should not pretend that our ancestors were stupid. We should actually believe that they were strategic. The restrictions imposed on Black and white women by civic and sacred society were not very different from those enacted on Black women in Black sacred and communal spaces. The purported God-breathed rules and arguably existed in a dialectical relationship. Black women were expected to remain consigned to the domestic sphere, remain quiet, not challenge authority, or culturally, to listen and obey to the words of men in their personal and public lives. Their influence was often relegated in the official narrative to childcare, domestic work, and serving God under male leadership. But if we use sacred Black testimony, which offers both a rhetoric and a method in its combination of the sacred and the secular, Black women moved through faith to teaching and then to political activism, which led to the national stage. So Black women's educational activism was inherently kinetic, taking Black women from the private and sanctified spaces of the home, in the name of Jesus, to the church, to the schoolroom, to the streets, and eventually the halls of Congress. So through the exercise of Christian faith, Black women pushed and expanded the boundaries of their lives out of the home, into the church, into the classrooms, and then into the legislature, which shaped the laws and statutes which governed our country then as now around education and life. So as teachers, Black women exercised their faith and, as always, transformed worlds. These educational activists are responsible for laying the ideological foundation of American public education premised on their interpretation of citizenship. How did I come to these conclusions? I read through around 80 education conventions and over 120 associated documents of meetings held all across the United States. These records show that conventions were covered in both white and Black newspapers, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, how also Black women education activists gradually emerged from archival invisibility as educational activism evolved through the political and religious colored conventions. In early conventions, both sacred and secular, education was always on agendas. As Black conventions evolved, lateral roots grew devoted to individual issues: temperance, labor, suffrage, business, education, and a number of other topics. There is a wealth of material for people to look into whenever people are so inclined. By focusing on Black women education activists in Delaware, I discovered a network of Black women whose work manifested in tangible institutions, including the development of Howard High School, the only Black high school in the state, and the founding of Delaware State, the only Black HBCU. Though largely unheralded, these Black women were successful in their managed to change public education in America, not only through establishing Black schools, but through their efforts to shape public education. Some of the reference with which teachers were held in the Black community spoke to the valorization of education and educators by Black people. This is interesting, partially in response to his denial and weaponization during and after slavery. We know educating enslaved people was prohibited by law in many states prior to emancipation. Perhaps one of the more interesting laws prohibiting literacy was passed in 1830 in North Carolina, which scholar Heather Williams describes as, quote, articulating the perceived kinship between slave literacy and slave control. The exemption of arithmetic is the most amusing piece. I don't know how many people actually know that. It was illegal to teach Black people to read, but it was fine to teach us how to count, right? And if you think about that, that makes sense because labor requires the ability to count and add and subtract, but literacy was considered a way to foment rebellion. Because literacy was therefore welded to freedom, just think about it for a minute, right? So literacy and freedom are welded. Citizenship and whiteness, well-educated Black people were considered both dangerous and improbable. In public discourse, many well-known Black activists like F.E.W. Harper and Douglass were publicly accused of being white in blackface by white people confounded by their excellence and familiarity with classic literature. Letters of verification were often included in slave narratives for this reason, to prove that the authors were Black. So when you read them, you're like, what is this? That's what that was about. But in Black communities, Black teachers were held in the highest regard. Black educated people were so symbolically and literally powerful, this seeming contradiction could both unrace and unsex. So Black women then occupied this intersecting space of both race and gender, right? Both powerful and not powerful. So people from Sojourner Truth to Ida B. Wells were accused of being white men dressed as Black women. They were dismissed in public and reviled in public, but in the Black community, they were celebrated. So teachers embody the possibilities of education offered to both young and Black women led that fight. Black activists fought the constrictions of Black freedom, therefore, in multiple areas, though through education to secure full citizenship remained a dominant theme. Beginning in 1821, Delaware passed a series of laws like many other states based on race. Delaware Black codes were meant to control the lives of the sizable free Black population. They started with restricting state sponsored education to white students and a series of other choices. By 1826, Black people were required to carry ID papers. By 1832, it was illegal for more than 12 Black people to gather after 10 p.m., et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But as early as 1853, Delaware Black citizens were organizing to resist this. Black men from Wilmington, Delaware, and Newcastle County signed a petition expressing their discontent about the Black codes, et cetera, et cetera. Just 3 years before that, Black people were not allowed together. Said another way, it was nigh to impossible for the overwhelming majority of Black men and the invisible Black women engaging in intellectual activism to fight for these rights were they not formally enslaved. It is very likely that for many of these activists, they were engaging in political discourse with their former enslavers to demand their rights. The magnitude of this work defies comprehension, especially when one remembers that Black women as a group had the least rights, the least amount of power, and yet were central. So we casually describe the intersectional pressures Black women endured during the course of their activism, but fighting for educational access for students while teaching, for suffrage, and for Black men while being denied access to the ballot box by race and gender, while being relegated to working in white women's houses and severely underpaid, would have been extremely stressful. Said another way, Black women were fighting and struggling on all fronts. In spite of that, they persevered. So it is in the glaring demands and consequences of Black women's activism that I suggest the critical role played by faith in their work. Sacred Black testimony as a rhetorical frame offers more room for the importance and ramifications of religion and faith for Black women activists. I don't want to go too far over time, so I'm going to close this out by saying that the biblical definition of faith, the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, glosses the devotion of Black women's educational activism, which took formal shape in the Colored Conventions movement and manifested in the educational activism which came to define American public education.
All right.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. So we've heard a lot about the color convention movements from the middle and toward the end. I'm going back to the beginning. So I'm Mark Tyler, the historiographer of the AME Church now, and prior to that I served 16 years as the pastor of Mother Bethel AME Church here in the city of Philadelphia. And I was laughing as Dr. Johnson was talking about that happened here in Philadelphia. Well, where we're sitting, this was not Philadelphia. Right. This was Germantown down there. Philadelphia was Center City, essentially. Delaware River to the Schuylkill, South Street to Spring Garden. That was the city. It was a very small city, and all these other little towns. Before the Consolidation Act, New York did the same thing, you know, gobbled them all up, and you can kind of debate whether or not that's worked. So, here in Philadelphia, down there in Philadelphia, was the birthplace of this colored convention movement that we've heard so much about. Last year I was working on my Founders Day presentation, Dr. Hendricks, and chose to actually kind of speak on this. That's why Dr. Johnson asked me. So I'm not a color convention scholar, but I understand the origins of it well enough to talk about it right now. And I think what's really important is that we never lose sight of why this started. Richard Allen, the founder of the AME Church, who I'm going to assume that most people in there have at least heard of before, was, I mean, such a famous person by 1830. He was born in 1760, died in 1831. And so when the colored convention movement began, just consider he had already become a legend. He freed himself from slavery for working during the Revolutionary War, hauling salt for the Continental Army. He was a hero in Philadelphia's yellow fever epidemic, risking his life. He'd won a huge victory to even have a free church. He fought against the white Methodist control and won in the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, an unlikely win in 1816, and immediately linked arms with black Methodists who had also walked out of segregated worship centers from Baltimore all the way on up into New Jersey and parts of Bucks County, Delaware as well. He had also held the first large-scale meeting of free black people in 1817 at Mother Bethel, one that kind of gets overlooked. I think the difference here is this is a continuous movement. That was a one-off where he and Absalom Jones and James Fortin and others brought all the free black people. If you listen to them, it's like the fish story. 3,000 people showed up. Like the building was like this big. 3,000 black people were in Mother Bethel. I don't buy it, but whatever. There was a lot of people that showed up to debate whether or not they would endorse the scheme of colonization by the American Colonization Society. So most people here probably know that it was branded until after the Civil War, something black people did not mess with. That happened at Mother Bethel. That branding of that happened in Philadelphia. So he was no stranger to these kind of moments. In fact, just one quick quote by David Walker, and David Walker's appeal gives you a sense of who Allen was at this period. Richard Allen, exclamation mark. Oh my God, 2 exclamation marks. The bare recollection of the labors of this man and his ministers among his deplorably wretched brethren, rendered so by the whites, to bring them to a knowledge of God, of heaven, fills my soul with all those very high emotions which would take the pen of an Addison to portray. It is impossible, my brethren, for me to say much in this work respecting that man of God, when the Lord shall raise up colored historians in succeeding generations to present the crimes of this nation to the then gazing world. The Holy Ghost will make them do justice to the name of Bishop Allen of Philadelphia. That's David Walker. I mean, that's high praise from David Walker toward the end of Allen's life. And so you can imagine that Allen at 70 years old in 1830 is probably looking, I mean, everything has been a battle for him. Everything. Nothing has come easy. Every time he thinks he's finished. In fact, the 1820s was filled with the strife of church divisions. Y'all know how church folk are. So churches are splitting away from Mother Bethel and breaking. They want to do their own thing. Allen is too heavy-handed. He's old-fashioned. He's this. So he gets to 70 and he's thinking, okay, I can kind of like just chill out and relax. But in 1829 in Cincinnati, not far from where my wife and I met, her parents went to Allen Temple AME Church there, which started, ironically, in 1824, shortly before this. Cincinnati experienced what we all know happened in Tulsa in the 1920s, what many people know happened in Wilmington, North Carolina in the late 1800s. It experienced a major, I don't call them race riots, it was a race massacre where white Cincinnati residents began to attack black residents, and the police were told to stand down, and the mayor did not intervene for days. Black people were murdered and killed. Now, what precipitated this is the fact that so many black people were moving into Cincinnati and taking advantage of the jobs that were there, competing against primarily European immigrants. So it always comes back down to these jobs, right? So one of the presenters was talking today about this, what I kind of call like white resentment in these episodes, where she talked about that earlier today, about this rage that comes. So we see that as early as the early 1800s. This happened in Philadelphia on Jamaican Emancipation Day, right in front of Mother Bethel. It happened all over the place. But 1829 was the type of event that sent a chill down the spine of black Americans. I mean, it was, it can happen in Cincinnati, it can happen anywhere. Where they were told this is just kind of, this is what happens out of the blue. Now, there were always these black laws on the books, 1807 black law, and they dusted it off in 1829, giving black citizens 30 days to secure a $500 bond, $12,000 in today's terms. Prove that they were not slaves, that they had not run away, agree that they would never marry a white person, agree to never own a gun, failure to comply would be met with expulsion of the city, from the city and the state, and prosecution of white families who helped black people raise the bond. So, I mean, they put them in a catch-22. And so as a result of this, I mean, you could kind of already tell there was already like this animosity that's growing, and it then spilled into open bloodshed. The result is that in 1829, some 70%, depending on the estimate, of black people left Cincinnati and went to Ohio, went further up in Ohio, and many went and established a new community in Canada. A few months later, I mean, not to be lost in this because nothing happens in a vacuum, Andrew Jackson, our president's favorite president, signs the Indian Removal Act. The first tribe moved, the Choctaw, begins in 1830. My family, my great-great-grandmother was Choctaw out of the Oklahoma reservations, moving them from Mississippi and Alabama along what we now know as the Trail of Tears. So into this moment, everyone in Black America is wondering, what should we do? One of the names that often gets lost in this is Hezekiah Grice. If you do anything on the black, colored convention movement, black convention movement, that name will continually pop up. Now, Richard Allen gets the credit because he hosted the meeting, but I always like this moment because Hezekiah Grice is in his late 20s. And I think in some way, maybe Richard Allen at 70 saw in Hezekiah Grice himself as a young man. Allen was 27 when they walked out of St. George's, and he burst on this national stage. And now at 70, perhaps he is seeing something in himself with Hezekiah Grice. This young man who works as a machinist in Baltimore, Maryland, of all places, half Haitian, half Black American, and like everyone, he's outraged, but he understands that he doesn't have the heft to call a meeting that he knows should be called. And so, thank you. So what does he do? He calls all the important black people in the country by letter. I'm writing a letter to, dear so-and-so, you've got the weight, call this meeting. And for months, no one replies. Nobody. It just falls on deaf ears, and he's beginning to believe that this is never going to happen. And then he gets a letter in August of 1830 by Richard Allen. Get your butt to Philadelphia immediately. Comes to Philadelphia, meets Allen and a smaller group. I won't go into all the details because I know we're running a long time, but suffice it to say that interaction and that meeting turns into the September Colored Convention movement. The power of that moment, right? It's a couple of things. One is the fact that we always need young people. I mean, these movements generally start with people who don't know any better. Like that's David walking down into a valley where his older brothers say, "Are you crazy? He's going to kill you," to Goliath. And it's Richard Allen walking out of St. George's doing something that no one ever did before, defying this huge white Methodist Episcopal church, but just standing out there. And now it's Hezekiah Grice, this 20-something-year-old who appeals to people. He's cold calling. It's an email in your inbox. And you're looking like, boy, I don't have time for this mess. But something in it strikes a chord with Richard Allen, that it moves Richard Allen to use his influence. I read for you what David Walker said. This is how he's like the Obama of his era. I'm not exaggerating because I'm AME. He is the king of his era. His name is right there with the top 3 or 4 major black leaders. And if Allen calls the meeting, people are going to show up. And Allen calls the meeting, and people show up. And Allen, sadly, though he's elected president of the first meeting, dies before the next meeting happens. Yes, after. He died at home.
No, the second meeting.
Yeah, the second meeting, right. So, but I'm saying, but again, this first meeting, in his last kind of gasp, he gives his all. So he never stops as this freedom fighter. And then the second and last thing I'll say is the importance of the act of having our own space. I talk about this a lot in my work in the AME Church and covering our history, that one of the most revolutionary things that Richard Allen did was to get a space. Yes. Modest as it was compared to Christ Church and St. Peter's and the other churches around, it was ours. It was a place where we could come and organize and gather before we could come here. And other places like this, where you didn't have to worry about the watchful eyes of white people inside. You wrote the guest list, and you could keep people out. I was in Mozambique this week for our AME meeting with our 38 countries outside of the U.S. They have their own intentional meeting. And I talked to the pastor of one of our churches in Lusaka in Zambia. When that church was present during the war for freedom against Rhodesia, they built a tunnel from that church to the street. And the freedom fighters, led by Kenneth Kaunda, who was a member of that church, would hide in the tunnels and run and hide in that Bethel AME church in Lusaka. Their version of the Underground Railroad. I've heard the same stories from AMEs in South Africa and from all around the world who took what Richard Allen and Sarah Allen and the rest of the founders of our church did by opening their doors to let people in, even for things they didn't come up with. It's not my idea, but I've got the space. And the space is ours. So let's see what we're going to do with it. And we should never miss how important that is. So I'll stop there. But I just think that it's a wonderful thing as an AME that this colored convention movement that carried throughout the rest of the 19th century started at Mother Bethel Church. Yeah.
I guess it's on me. And we're all over time, so we're going to try to keep this moving. My name is Janelle Moore-Almond. I am a teacher in the Philadelphia School District. I teach at the George Washington Carver High School of Engineering and Science. It's an honor for me because I'm also an alum. And I teach history. And it is time in our country to reframe Black history. One of the things that Philadelphia has done well and has been doing well for the past 20 years, and also has been singular in doing, is requiring that all of their students graduate after taking an African American history course. So while other states might say you need some content, which we'll talk about in a minute, or you should take a Black history class, in order to graduate, in order to be fully educated in Philadelphia for whatever it's worth, you need to take a class in Black history. That in and of itself speaks to the importance of telling a story that hasn't been told across this country about the people that built this country. Now, if for a moment I can, commingle church and state, because I can't do that at work. John 8:32 says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." When we think about education and democracy, if you are not educated, you do not have the tools for democracy.
That's right.
You do not have the tools to participate. And when we think about the purposes of education, we think about the development of fundamental and practical skills. Things like you have to learn to read, you have to learn how to do math. You also should learn how to pursue truth, however you define that, through critical interrogation and discourse. But the hidden curriculum in schools, and all of us or participate in it, are to reinforce these cultural norms and systems. American education supports the American system. The American system is rife with racism, is rife with capitalism. These aren't the things that we talk about, though, when we sit in history class. These aren't the things that we acknowledge when we ask students to take standardized tests. It's just one of the things that, you're in history class, you know the story, you're American, it's good. But we have to start being explicit about this, particularly if we want our children to be successful and also liberated. Because when we think about teaching not only Black history, but history period, we are in a time politically where there is real discomfort with quote unquote truth. So I don't know how many of you have read the current person in office, his executive orders. If you have not, I encourage you to, especially if you need to stay awake, because it is the stuff of nightmares. But one of the executive orders is an executive order specific to education, talking about ending radical indoctrination in K-12 schooling. And it says, and this text is pretty much taken from the 1776 Commission, is that an individual, by virtue of the individual's race, color, sex, or national origin, bears responsibility for, should feel guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress because of, should be discriminated against, blamed, or stereotyped for, or should receive adverse treatment because of actions committed in the past by other members of the same race, color, sex, or national origin in which the individual played no part. So, in layman's terms, we cannot talk about your race. We cannot talk about your gender. We cannot talk about the harm that has been done because of it. We cannot talk about the fact that there are generations of people that have been impacted by systemic oppression. We're not supposed to be talking about redlining. We're not supposed to be talking about slavery. We're not supposed to talk about any of that, let alone intersectionality. Yeah, I still teach it. But all of this stuff is to avoid harm. But harm for whom? Who is erased in this narrative? Who is erased in this executive order? And yet, for many teachers, particularly in places outside of Philadelphia, violating this has real consequences. It means you could lose your certificate. There are Google forms that are circulating where students can inform on their teachers, as if it is, 1950s, and they're wondering, are you a communist and have you ever been? So it is very, very real.
Come on.
And not only that, in our public spaces. So this was 6th and Market in August at the president's house. Because, as I'm sure most of the people in this know, George Washington, as our first president, was also a slaveholder who was committed to holding slaves even as he moved to Philadelphia, which had outlawed slavery. And he maintained slaveholding by taking the enslaved people in his household out of the city every 6 months to reset the clock. So that's the story that we don't learn about George Washington, because I know I didn't learn it. And if I was to teach this now, I am still met, again, with the threat, because that's what those placards look like a couple of weeks ago. Again, there was resistance in Philadelphia, and these signs have been restored for now, because they're in the appeals process. But this is the state of history in this country. And when we think about these challenges, one, it is dangerous to undermine the narrative of American exceptionalism. It's difficult to challenge, these ideas about how wonderful America has been, but also not that difficult, particularly with students that realize that this is a country that needs them but does not want them.
Well,
so when you have content, particularly history, that lacks affirming pedagogy, lacks affirming content, to hear you talk about Richard Allen and how important he was, and know that in my classroom, when I asked the question, do you know who Richard Allen is? I teach in Philadelphia. They said no. And then one person said, oh, didn't they name the projects after him?
Nope.
So for Black children to only know Richard Allen because of his name on a housing project tells me that we have failed in our responsibility to our children about content. And it's not just Black students, it's all students. Because we are not telling this full story. And then, of course, the last piece is limited implementation. None of us who are teachers have gotten into it for the money. And when you look around, there's a lack of resources about Black content that goes beyond sort of your tried and true stock Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and even that's not done well. Okay? So when we think about multicultural education, a lot of these reforms came from a place that was sort of rooted in this idea that in order for students to succeed, they needed to see more of themselves in the classroom. And that in and of itself is true. But with these efforts, it is, again, the promise, but also the problem of how you actually make that happen. Because when you look at how multicultural education plays out, on one hand, we have the contributions, the heroes and holidays. How many classrooms in this country are not going to hear about another Black person as of Monday?
Wow. That's right.
Because that's going to be what happens. It's going to be March 1st, and then we're moving on. We're done with the Black people for the year. Okay? The other piece is when it's additive, and it's, oh, okay, well, you know, we're talking about World War II, so we're just going to add in the thing about the Japanese. That'll be great. That's enough. It's ethnic. And that's all. But we are trying to get to what we hope we can get to is multi-ethnic education that is either transformative or leads our students to social action. So that it takes into account multiple perspectives, and it also empowers our students with the knowledge and the skills to go out and make changes on their own. That's the goal. So how does all of this connect to the color conventions? Well, you've all heard about that. But we have developed a curriculum that uses the conventions as a vehicle for developing these skills with students. So why do we teach it? One, because we have to start enlarging the narrative about what a civil rights movement is. It did not start in the 1950s. Okay, it started when Black people came to these shores. There has been resistance. In addition, this idea of Black-led social and political organizing, okay, which constantly is asking these questions: what does it mean to be a citizen? What does it mean to live in a democracy? What does it mean to be equal? This is also something that is a part of our culture, a part of, again, the narrative of what it means. When we think about the questions of what it means to be an American, Black people have always been asking us. But again, they are left out of the narrative. Lastly, this is how we live. Education, faith, your community, all of these things have always been interrelated. And the fact that we have sort of siloed, you have faith in one place, you have classrooms in another place, you have community in another place, as if all of these things are not interrelated. We are also, again, doing a disservice to our students. So when I see this image, this is one of the sort of famous images of the color convention, I always focus on this young person right here in the corner with the pigtails. Right there in the corner. Because this sends the message that this convention is not just for the grown folk.
That's right.
Like, young people were there. Young people are a part of it. Young people need to be a part of these conversations. Because if they're not, what does that say about our community? It's too late by the time they're grown to start having these conversations. So we teach the color conventions as a resistance to this hidden curriculum. Again, this sort of marginalizes, tokenizes the Black experience. We also give, again, teachers and students methods to look at communities and students as curriculum and not just things that they've been given. And then last but not least, to go back to Dr. Berger's point, it also revises the narrative to include the vital importance of Black women to this movement. So we started in 2020. They contracted with the school district and some history teachers like myself, we came up with our very, very first unit, which was about the color conventions overall. There are lessons here. If you're interested, come see me. We got copies, we give it away. It also, again, is an extension of the Color Convention's website. So this is produced by the Center for Black Digital Research out of Penn State. Shout out to Dr. Foreman, hey. We got sample exhibits. I'm rushing just because I know about time. But for these exhibits, what the Education Committee has done is we've come up with not only units, but guides for teaching that include resources, methods, questions teachers can ask. In addition, we've come up with community partnerships where we develop curriculum for some of the murals that have been developed. So this one is in Southwark Plaza. We have another one not too far away at Green Street Friends, which features Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and some other famous African-American women. And then we also have created curriculum for Douglas Day. How many of you participated in Douglas Day? Who heard of Douglas Day? Do y'all know what Douglas Day is? Okay, so on Valentine's Day, because we don't know when Frederick Douglass was born, there is an online celebration of Frederick Douglass, which includes, again, transcribing documents. So these really, really important archival documents, they are digitized and they're done by the community. We also have like a bake-off, right? There's all kinds of stuff online. But one of the things that we've been doing for the past few years is also coming up with unit plans for teachers to use lessons, the whole unit, just to, again, bring this information into their classroom. This year, the theme was the 14th Amendment. One of the lessons that we did was we asked students to create a social media campaign about the 14th Amendment, where they had to talk about the 3 parts of the 14th Amendment. These are examples of some of the work my students did. This is a Instagram post, and you can see that they came up with the post in the background and then the comments. This one, do we have a minute? Can we do it? Oh, it's a video. It's a student. We love student work. We're going to do the student work. This is a video that a few of my students put together.
Due process is the government's
Can y'all hear?
fair rule. It means that if the state wants to throw you in jail or take your stuff, they can't just go out and do it. They have to give you a fair warning, let you tell your side of the story in court, and follow the law every step of the way, regardless of the alleged crime or of any factors such as race, gender, or social status. A great example of this that dates back to the Civil War/Reconstruction period is when after slavery was abolished in Maryland, a young black woman named Elizabeth Turner was immediately forced into apprenticeship, which is a form of forced labor. This was done by her former enslaver, but using the Civil Rights Act of 1866, she sued for her freedom. A judge ruled that her due process rights were violated because of the law that gave her fewer protections than white workers, and she was set free. This is proof that a seat in the courtroom was necessary for her freedom. However, due process was violated back then. Like, for example, in 1865 in Louisiana, when black codes passed, where African Americans had to have a written permit from a white employer to even enter the town. If a person was caught with a permit, they could be arrested immediately. And due process is violated to this day with immigration enforcement unjustly detaining and deporting people. In this day and age, especially, it is important to know your right to due process. You have a right to a fair trial, a right to hear the evidence against you, and to fight it in court.
Now, this is, again, the work of a 10th grade student. Okay, they were in groups of 3, but what you can see here, one, an understanding of the 14th Amendment, a model that they use, social media, a call to action, a connection to the present. These are the kinds of things that we want our students to take from the educational products that we create about the Color Convention. So, again, when we think about reframing Black history and some of the considerations, we want to make sure that it's culturally relevant. We want to make sure that there are opportunities for collaboration and discussion. We want to make sure that it's rigorous. Okay? This shouldn't be easy. Okay? We also want to make sure that they have the historical thinking skills that are necessary for them to be successful as they, again, engage in democracy, which means you need to understand the background. You need to understand sources. You need to see what's changed and what stayed the same. And you also need to know how to make an argument that doesn't involve you being a troll on the internet. So, all things being said, again, we are trying and hopefully succeeding in centering, again, multiple histories and narratives shifting from these contributive and additive approaches to one that encourages transformation and social action. And then finally, again, protecting history education as a fundamental element of democratic practice. Thank you.
I hope we have a little time for Q&A. I know we're running short on time, but I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge and give Dr. Gabrielle Foreman an opportunity, who is the founder and co-director of Ditch Black and the Color Convention movement, an opportunity to say a few words if you would like to. Show some love to Dr. Foreman.
It's so good to be here to learn with and from you and with and from this community, so thank you for coming. I just want to say that you can find a lot of this history at coloredconventions.org, and there is a teaching tab. We have teaching for college professors and a curriculum for high school students. I just want to thank and acknowledge the work of the 4 panelists who are here today. They're bringing this archival research to an interpretive framework, to a building of a democracy through schooling, through analysis, through an interrogation of how that moment speaks to ours. This was a movement that really people thought ended in 1865. This work is bringing us into, and the beginning is critically important. And I want to acknowledge that beginning, that space, right, for us to do our work is critically important, but it doesn't just stop at the Civil War as the abolition, and it begins before the abolition movement begins in 1833, right? And so we see this beginning that Black people are leading out of Mother Bethel, right? So they are leading before the antebellum. There's always been an abolitionist movement, right? But the one that we hear about begins after the meeting in 1830, right? So we need to figure out who's leading and who's following. 4 of the first 5 conventions are held in Philadelphia, all right? So and this is critically important. But the refounding, right, of the debates about citizenship happened after the Civil War. You can find all of that at coloredconventions.org, along again with that curriculum, which is now being taught because of the work of these 2 leaders right here across the country in high schools and in colleges. We want to thank Mother Bethel for being a partner in the work that we do. We did Douglas Day, this global transcribe-a-thon that happens of Black records every February 14th on Frederick Douglass's birthday, was established out of work that we did, that Denise Berger, now Dr. Berger, led with the AME Church, who was doing the actual transcription of not just the records that were held at AME Church hosts of the color conventions themselves in Philadelphia, but all across the United States.
That's right. Yep.
Right, and into Canada.
Yep.
So that movement from here to Luanda, right? We see those early movements through the AME Church, and we want to thank Mother Bethel for being a partner, the historiographer of the lay, right, who led that effort and that partnership. They have always been such a productive partner with us in resurrecting history that we all share. So I just want to say thank you to these amazing panelists, this amazing anniversary.
I think that might be our time. I don't know if anybody's coming into the room. Yeah, right.
Andre, I just want to make one acknowledgement.
I didn't.
Hiding here in the back.
Reverend
But
Campbell.
the current pastor of Mother Bethel.
What? Come on now, wait a minute.